In 1961, a one-man garage owner named Earl worked out of a barn outside Macon, Georgia. A man brought him a Ford pickup that stalled at every stop sign. Earl never lifted the hood. He slid a screwdriver against the intake, pressed the handle behind his ear, and listened for 9 seconds. Then one word: valve. A sticking intake valve on number 8, found by sound alone. That truck ran another 190,000 miles. Earl died in 1994 and never wrote a word of it down. That trick is number 25. The man who could have taught it to you is gone. They did not learn this from a book. There was no book. The knowledge lived in the hands and ears of men who stood beside running engines for 30 years until the engine became something they could read like a face. When a motor ran wrong, they heard it, felt it, smelled it, and they knew. We traded it for a screen that tells you which $400 part to buy next. The men who could diagnose an engine across a parking lot are in the ground now. Number 22 is done with nothing but your thumb and your nose, and it catches a cracking head weeks before it strands you. Number 14 kept worn engines holding compression past 300,000 miles and was erased from every trade school manual after 1980. And number 3, the full hand tune-up every American mechanic once knew, has vanished because the part it relied on cannot be set with a computer. These 25 secrets were not about money. They were about a relationship between a man and a machine that no warning light has ever replaced. The engine spoke. The mechanic answered. Hit that subscribe button and let us count down the 25 lost garage secrets old American mechanics took to the grave before computers killed the craft. Number 25, the long screwdriver used as a stethoscope. The first tool an old mechanic reached for. You pressed the tip to the valve cover and the handle to the bone behind your ear. A tick rode up the steel. A knock came deeper. A whir meant a bearing. An apprentice in 1959 got a screwdriver before a wrench and swept the floor a week longer if he could not name the noise. The $400 chassis ear that replaced it hears less. It was not a tool. It was an ear with a steel handle. Number 24, reading the spark plug porcelain in the sunlight. Not a diagnostic step. It was reading the engine's diary. You held the white insulator up to the daylight. Light tan meant the mixture was right. Sooty black meant rich. Chalky white meant lean, and a valve about to burn. A country mechanic in 1956 trusted the plug over the owner, who swore the car ran fine while it was burning oil. Every American Phi 8 from 1955 to 1975 was built to be read this way. OBD2 sealed the window. The plug was not a part, it was a witness. Number 23, the vacuum gauge and the dance of its needle. One gauge read 30 faults off a single port. You hooked it to a manifold port and watched the needle. Steady meant healthy. A flicker meant a burned valve. A drift meant a leak. A rhythmic swing meant a head gasket. A shop owner in 1958 made his apprentices call the fault before the gauge settled. The gauge cost $5, and named problems a $4,000 scan tool still struggles to find. The gauge did not diagnose the engine. It only helped a man hear what it was already confessing. Number 22, reading the oil with your thumb and your nose. No gauge, just the dipstick and your senses. You wiped a smear between your fingers, felt for grit, and smelled it. Sweet meant coolant. Raw gasoline meant a flooding carburetor thinning the oil. A burnt stink meant it had run too hot. A truck driver in 1962 caught a cracking head by the smell at a fuel stop, weeks before it stranded him 200 miles from help. This was standard before the self-serve pump killed the full-service bay. The gauge measured the level. The nose caught the death. Number 21. Reading the tailpipe. The exhaust was a confession in vapor. You ran a finger inside the pipe and looked. Dry gray meant a clean burn. Black soot meant rich. Oily black meant burning oil. White steam meant coolant in the cylinders. An Esso man in 1955 sold the right tune-up before the driver spoke, not to pad the bill, but because the suit had told him the truth. Catalytic converters scrubbed the pipe clean and took the diagnosis with them. The driver argued. The pipe never did. Number 20. The wet compression test. One squirt of oil told rings from valves. You ran a dry test, then squirted oil into the cylinder and tested again. If the number jumped, the rings were worn. If it stayed low, the valves were leaking. A rebuilder in 1957 used this to keep an honest man from paying for the wrong repair. The procedure sat in every shop manual through the 1970s, then thinned out as engines became throwaways. It was not a teardown. It was $1 of oil that made the teardown unnecessary. Number 19. Setting the valve lash by feel with a feeler gauge. Before hydraulic lifters spread, valves were set by hand. You slid the blade between rocker and stem until it dragged with a faint, even resistance, then locked it down. Too tight burned a valve. Too loose hammered the train to death. Polish and Italian mechanics in the 1950s in Detroit handed you the blade and said, "Set them, drive it, come back." Hydraulic lifters sealed the adjustment away in the 1970s, and a craft of the fingers went quiet. The blade did not measure the gap. His fingers did. Number 18. Setting the ignition points and the dwell. A weak spark killed engines slowly. You set the point gap with a feeler, then dialed the dwell to the center of spec on a meter. Too little and the engine missed. Too much and the points burned. A tune-up man in 1958 set dwell even on cars nobody complained about, refusing to let a quiet problem become a dead engine. Electronic ignition sealed the job inside a box by the mid-1970s. The spark lit the fire. The dwell decided how clean it burned. Number 17. Setting the timing by ear under load on the open road. The light set it cold. His ear set it where the engine lived. You timed it cold with the light, then drove hard up a grade and listened for the marbles in a can rattle of detonation. The instant you heard it, you eased the timing back. A mechanic in 1956 Tennessee tuned this way because a customer drove up hills with his family aboard, and detonation he could not hear was eating his pistons. Computer-controlled timing took the knob away in the 1980s. The light set the timing cold. His ear set it true. Here is something nobody is counting. The men who learned to read an engine by ear, who came up before the scan tool and the sealed module, are nearly all gone. The youngest are past 80. They were the last link to a time when a mechanic was a craftsman, not a parts replacer. They did not store this in books. They stored it in their hands and their ears, built over 30,000 hours next to engines that talked back. When they died, the manuals stayed on the shelf, but the instinct went into the ground. The chain ran grandfather to father to son for 3 generations. Then, a generation grew up looking at screens. We are writing down what we can before the last of them are gone. Number 16. Repacking the front wheel bearings by hand. A dry bearing seized its speed. A packed one ran 250,000 miles. You washed the old grease out and dragged the bearing through a glob of fresh grease in your palm until it pushed out the far side, then set the preload by feel. A garage man in 1960 repacked his regular's bearings every spring for nothing because he had seen a seized one throw a family into a ditch. Sealed throwaway hubs replaced the serviceable bearing in the 1980s. It was not the grease that saved the bearing, it was the hand that packed it. Number 15, setting the carburetor idle mixture by vacuum and by ear. A quarter turn was the difference between smooth and rough. You turned each mixture screw slowly for the highest steady vacuum reading. The idle lifted as the mixture came right, then stumbled when you went too far. A station mechanic in 1962 could set a mixture by sound alone. He knew a lean stumble from a rich lope the way you know the cough of someone you love. Fuel injection erased the mixture screw after 1981. The gauge gave him a number. His ear gave him the engine. Number 14, lapping the valves to a true seat. This kept worn engines holding compression long past their time. You smeared grinding compound on the valve face and spun it against the seat until a clean gray ring showed all the way around, then washed every trace of grit away. A rebuilder in 1956 lapped valves the way a man hones a knife, slow and even, and would not rush it for any price. Hardened seats and unleaded gas in the mid-1970s ended the art. The compound cut the metal. His patience cut it true. Number 13, sealing a small exhaust leak with wire and furnace cement. A backyard fix that outlasted a muffler shop weld. You packed the leak with high-heat furnace cement and wrapped it tight with safety wire while the cement was soft. The wire held the patch as it baked hard on the hot pipe. A country mechanic in 1953 kept wire and cement in a cigar box, $2 all in, and kept a neighbor's exhaust quiet for years. This was roadside knowledge before shops would only replace a muffler. It was not a weld. It was patience wrapped in wire. Number 12, greasing every chassis Zerk fitting on schedule. 10 minutes saved the whole front end. You found every fitting, tie rods, ball joints, kingpins, U-joints, and pushed grease into each until the old grease squeezed out clean. A garage man in 1959 greased his regular's cars for nothing because a dry ball joint let go without warning at 50 miles an hour with children in the back seat. Sealed lubed for life joints arrived in the 1970s, which meant lubed until they failed. It was not the part that wore out. It was the 10 minutes nobody spends anymore. Number 11, cutting open the used oil filter to read the metal inside. The filter caught everything the engine shed. You cut the can open and spread the pleated paper in the light. Fine gray paste was normal wear. Bright flakes meant a bearing failing. Glitter meant trouble coming fast. A fleet mechanic in 1957 cut every filter he pulled because a caught bearing was a Saturday repair and a missed one left a man stranded on a pass. As engines became sealed throwaways, no one read what the filter caught. The filter was not trash. It was the engine's confession for anyone who opened it. Number 10, reading the magnetic drain plug at every oil change. A magnet pulled the iron out, and the shavings told the story. You wiped the plug clean and held it to the light. Fine gray fuzz was normal. Bright slivers meant watch it. Heavy flakes meant a bearing on its way out. A mechanic in 1955 caught a dying engine 4 months early off the fuzz on a plug. The owner laughed, then thanked him. The quick lube model drained the oil fast and never looked at the plug. The plug was not a part. It was a witness. Number 9, freeing a stuck valve or lifter with the right oil and patience. A noise most shops now answer with a new engine. You ran a flush of light oil, then good detergent oil, and let it idle warm while you worked the throttle to wash the varnish loose. By morning, the tick was often gone. A neighborhood mechanic in 1961 saved a widow's only car this way for the price of an oil change, when a shop would have quoted a rebuild she could not pay. As engines turned disposable, the cheap cure was forgotten. The cure still works. They just stopped offering it because the rebuild pays better. There is a reason no one teaches you to read your own engine anymore. In 2021, the right to repair movement won a partial victory in Massachusetts, forcing automakers to share diagnostic data with independent shops. The industry spent over $25 million fighting it, and fights it still. The reason is the math. The dealership service network in this country earns over $116 billion a year, and that number depends on you not understanding what is wrong with your car. A man who could read a spark plug did not need a $185 scan. Every secret on this list made a driver harder to sell to. The craft was not lost. It was made unprofitable and then allowed to die. Number 8. Warming the engine before draining the oil. Hot oil carries the dirt out. Cold oil leaves half in the pan. You ran the engine to operating temperature before you pulled the plug. Warm oil ran thin and fast and carried the grit and sludge out with it. A Hudson mechanic in 1957 refused to drain a man's oil until the engine had idled 4 minutes. He would say, "Drain it cold, and half the dirt stays in." The quick lube model drained cold to save 2 minutes. Hot oil leaves clean. Cold oil leaves the dirt behind. Number 7. Letting the oil drain the full 10 minutes, not the quick 90 seconds. Patience the modern shop cannot afford. You pulled the plug and walked away, letting the last of the old oil weep from the pan. A rushed drain left a cup of filthy oil behind to foul the fresh fill. A fleet mechanic in 1965 timed his drains by the coffee cup, and the Chevy he serviced this way logged over 600,000 miles on its original bottom end. The coupon shop cannot leave a car on the rack that long and make the margin. The fresh oil was never the problem. The old oil he left behind was. Number 6. Changing the first oil at 500 miles, not 3,000. The break-in miles carry the dirt that kills engines. A fresh engine shed metal and casting grit in its first miles, grinding every bearing it touched. You drained that first oil early, cut the filter to read it, and refilled clean. A mechanic in 1957 did this against the factory's schedule because he had torn down enough young engines to know what those miles left behind. Extended drain intervals buried the habit by the 1990s. The factory wrote 3,000. The engine wrote 500. He believed the engine. Number 5. Priming the oil and watching the pressure climb before the car ever moved. The first dry seconds do more harm than 1,000 miles. After any oil change, you stood at the gauge, watching the needle climb and the lifters quiet as oil reached the top of the engine. Only then did you let it move. A Mobil station owner in 1956 would not release a car for the first 60 seconds. A Ford engineer later told him it was the most important thing he did. The drive-through model puts speed first. The first turn of a primed engine is gentle. The first turn of a dry one is a wound. Number 4. Driving the first mile gently after a cold start. Not a rule a mechanic enforced, a discipline a driver kept. You did not floor it out of the driveway. You drove the first mile gently, while the oil reached every bearing and the metal warmed to its clearances. For a man in 1965 who saved 8 years for his first new car, The gentle first mile was respect for a machine bought with overtime and money not spent. Modern drivers floor it cold and wonder why timing chains stretch at 80,000 miles. It was not technical knowledge. It was gratitude in mechanical form. Number 3, the complete tune-up done by hand, points, plugs, condenser, timing, dwell, and mixture, set by one man in under an hour. You replaced the points, plugs, and condenser, set the dwell, timed it with a light, and refined it by ear. Every adjustment fed the next. A station mechanic in 1968 did all of it for $14.95 while you waited, his hands moving without his eyes having to follow. The feedback carburetor in 1981 and OBD2 in 1996 sealed it inside a computer. It was not a service. It was a man telling an engine he had been paying attention. Number 2, the weekly walk-around the mechanic taught the owner to keep. The best craftsman alive cannot save an engine its owner runs into the ground. You checked the oil and coolant every week. You looked at the belts. You looked at the ground where the car had sat overnight. A drop of oil meant something. A puddle meant the week's plan had changed. A garage man in 1958 sent every customer home with this habit, treating the driver as the engine's first mechanic. The AAA found in 1968 that drivers who inspected weekly had far fewer breakdowns. The mechanic made the engine sound. The habit kept it that way. Number 1, listening to the engine before you ever put it in gear. That is all. Before you backed out, you sat 10 seconds and listened. You started it and did not move. The idle was either steady or it was not. A faint miss, a slight roughness, an unfamiliar tick, and you caught it before you rolled. Most mornings, nothing was wrong, but every breakdown in the history of the automobile announced itself first. Your grandfather did this without calling it anything. He called it noticing 10 seconds every morning for 50 years, and he never once waited on a shoulder for a tow. We replaced the ear with a check engine light, and the light is the last thing to speak, not the first. Number 1 is not a trick. It is the habit underneath every other secret on this list. None of these secrets required a certification, a scan tool, or a subscription to a manufacturer's database. They required a willingness to listen to a running engine and to believe you could understand what it was telling you. That belief was the default setting of every American garage. It was not confidence born from training. It was confidence born from intimacy, from spending enough hours with engines that you could read one the way a farmer reads weather. And it kept ordinary cars running past 500,000 miles in the hands of men who never finished high school. We did not lose the tools. The vacuum gauges are still in the drawers. The feeler gauges are still on the benches. We lost the hands that knew how to use them, and the ears that knew what a healthy engine sounded like. We lost the old man who stood beside you when you were 16, put your hand on the valve cover and said, "Feel that, hear that. That is what right sounds like." He is gone now. Most of what he knew went with him, but not all of it. Some of it is in this video written down at last, because someone had to do it before the last of those men were in the ground. The next time your car makes a sound you do not recognize, do not reach for the phone. Open the hood and listen. The craft is not dead. It is waiting for someone to pick the tools back up.